one way to save them and everyone else!
Episode 4 of Invincible's third season gave us a visual example of one of the first lessons that Mark Grayson's father imparted unto him with regards to his own life. When he was beating him senseless, Omni-Man asked him what he would have in 500 years. And back then, Mark said he'd still have his father. But he's part of a race that's destined to live longer than entire civilizational periods. What happens to a man who is truly alone, cursed with immortality, forced to rule when he knows he doesn't have the goods to do it? Well, that's where Mad King Immortal comes in. Episode 4 gives us a deep cut from the comics, because much of what happened in this episode ties into the series ending. So don't tell us we didn't give you a spoiler warning first, because this is it. From this moment forth, we'll be discussing spoilers from the comics, so you better prepare yourself accordingly, guys. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
It worked! We found him!
2 rogues from the future and a date gone wrong. How Mark Grayson ended up in the future. So you remember those 2 guys that stole the Declaration of Independence from the first episode of Season 3? That's Fightmaster and Dropkick. They look like common fugitives with futuristic gadgets. But turns out, they're actually from the future. The reason they stole the Declaration of Independence wasn't because they were trying to pull a Nicolas Cage a la National Treasure. They were actually trying to weaponize the damn thing. For some reason, they believed its ink would help them defeat the big bad villain from their timeline. But of course, it didn't work, because if ink could kill like that, you'd best believe the ops getting sent vials upon vials by your boy. But the thing is, Mark doesn't know all this, so between saving Rex from Multipol and trying to stop the Declaration from leaving the Smithsonian, he got tied up and let the future fugitives escape. He was on a date with Eve when they reappeared, and Mark thought they wanted to throw hands at first, but they shocked him by saying they wanted his help instead. You see, Fightmaster and Dropkick come from a time where Earth is ruled by an undying tyrant. This man has oppressed the planet for centuries with his cybernetic army and caused death and destruction on a scale hitherto unheard of. Okay, they didn't exactly say that, but Mark got their meaning and decided to cut his date short to save the world again, much to Eve's annoyance. He accompanied Fightmaster and Dropkick to the future, where he saw that their story wasn't a lie after all. Earth was a dystopian wasteland, and for some reason, its ruler wanted to see Mark. He was captured almost immediately after his arrival in the comics, and swiftly brought in front of the King of Earth, whose throne was a lot more intimate there, shall we say. In the show, his throne room is massive and his face is covered in shadows, so Mark can't quite understand who he's talking to. But when he comes closer and he sees the king's face, he realizes it's Immortal, and he's shocked. Immortal tells him he hasn't heard that name in centuries, and that the only person alive to know it is Mark. He then proceeds to make the most insane request of his old friend.
A king cannot quit! He must fall forever! Kill me!
The consequences of enforced peace are direr than war. How Immortal became King of Earth. So how did Immortal end up becoming King of Earth? Well, turns out it was kind of Mark's fault. The show adds a few scenes and pieces of dialogue to their original exchange from the comics, but the gist of it is that Mark left Immortal in charge of Earth while he went and took control of the Viltrumite Empire. That's right, folks. There's a timeline out there where Mark becomes Emperor of the Viltrumites, and it's a lot more common in the multiverse than you'd think. Mark took his family with him when he left Earth, and he promised Immortal that he'd come back to check on him, but he never did. Several centuries have passed since then, and Immortal has become so lonely that he doesn't even remember his own life properly.
Is this about Kate? Did she die?
When Mark asks him if this is about Kate, seeing as they've recently got married in his time, Immortal thinks he's talking about Eve because that's how obsessed he was with meeting Mark again. He latched on to any sign or symbol he could get to be reunited with his friend because he was done with suffering. Immortal broke into a mad rant about how he's had hundreds of wives, but he couldn't remember a single one of them because he was just so damn old. He did what Mark told him initially. He ruled over humans as benevolently as he could. But when a man keeps hitting the same brick wall from different directions, Sometimes his only choice is to break the wall altogether. Immortal is immortal, but he's no Viltrumite. People on Earth had gotten used to the power level of Mark and his kin to the point that Immortal had started feeling useless. Besides, he wasn't part of a race of beings who always had each other to save them from their loneliness. Immortal was truly alone, so when he realized Mark wasn't coming back, he started doing things to get his attention. It began with simple executions and persecuting innocent women and children, because he knew this would piss him off. When that didn't work, Immortal started funding resistance attempts against himself, hoping against hope that Mark would show up, but he never did. When he finally saw his old friend, the Mad King didn't even have enough time to register the truth behind his youthful appearance, calling him thinner than he remembered him to be. Mark realized Immortal was truly gone when he asked him to kill him, and he initially refuses. This is where the show diverges from the comics somewhat, because instead of complying with his friend's wishes, Mark tries talking him down first. Centuries of slaughter ended with his own, how Mark stopped the Mad King, and what it did to him. Amazon's Invincible has done a great job of remaining largely faithful to the source material, but when all your episodes are an hour long, you need to fill in gaps sometimes with original dialogues, and that's exactly what happens in the show. Invincible tries to talk Immortal out of basically committing suicide, because he doesn't want to kill him. He's been having a hard time trying to adhere to his no-killing rule of late, and Oliver wanting to become Kid Omni-Man hasn't helped things. Mark repeatedly rejects Immortal's pleas to take his life because he still thinks the guy can change. He initially puts up no resistance to Immortal's onslaught, but when it becomes clear that he won't stop at any cost, Mark has no choice but to indulge his friend's last wish. He swiftly decapitates Immortal once he reaches his threshold for tolerance, and is immediately thanked by Flightmaster and Dropkick. But Mark is in no mood for thanks. He just killed an alternate version of his friend, and he's overcome with trauma. He barely manages to tell them that they need to keep his head and body separate to prevent him from coming back, and they try to encourage him by saying that he did the right thing, but Mark doesn't believe it. How can killing a man he's fought alongside so many times be okay? How did Immortal reach such a low point in his life? And what did Mark do to deserve his ire? Is this what he was going to end up becoming like long after Eve passed away? He knows that they're going to be together for a long time, but Eve isn't a Viltrumite, and she doesn't have his longevity. What will happen to Mark when he's finally alone, like his dad told him he would be? Will he also become a tyrant? The thing is, Immortal's problems are different from Mark's. Their memory systems are entirely different from one another. Mark can remember events from the distant past well enough because Viltrumites are born to have long lives. Immortal wasn't, so when he crosses a certain number of years, his memory semi-resets, making him mentally and emotionally unstable. You tack on Mark's broken promise to return to his friend on top of that, and we've got the perfect recipe for madness. But his reaction to Immortal's request wasn't this delayed in the comics. There, Mark only took a couple of big hits before swiftly decapitating Immortal and informing Fightmaster and Dropkick on how to keep him from returning. He did deliver a short speech that attempted to unpack it all, but it wasn't nearly as tragic as what the show gave us. In the comics, Invincible was already turning into a hard man for whom killing was becoming a basic instinct, but the show is clearly stretching things out. It's good and bad in a way, because the thing is, Immortal was left in charge of Earth on account of being the only person who could bring it true stability. In the comics, the final chapters of Invincible are focused on making the entire universe a better place. Mark has dealt with Thrag, but he still has one more enemy left in the form of his former ally, Robot. Turns out, spending centuries ruling over an alien race is enough to give a person delusions of grandeur, and Robot took his to the extreme. He effectively enslaved Earth's population using a drone army, and it took Mark invading Earth with a gigantic force to finally put an end to his threat. In the end, he leaves Robot's mind behind as an advisor for Immortal, likely because he remembered what happened the first time he gave his friend this responsibility. The animated show makes a sly reference to to this by showing us a bunch of robots that verbalize their king's final decree to free all his subjects after his death. Maybe that's just an Easter egg, or maybe it's a warning that even the company of a lifelong acquaintance won't be enough to keep Immortal sane. If he is from the same timeline as Invincible, just from a distant point in the future, then his death forms a time loop that we don't think Mark will be eager to tangle with. But something tells us it isn't, and leaving Robot with Immortal as his eternal assistant is the best thing he can do for his friend. He trusts Immortal with his life, just not his own existence, and we hope that the current timeline's Immortal has a gentler fate than his Mad King future version, because otherwise we're all going to end up like Fight Master and Dropkick, and we don't think any of us find those two to be badass. Marvelous verdict. But having said that, this is all we've got for you guys with this one. Mad King Immortal is not something we had on our bucket list for Season 3, but seeing as he's already here, we can expect a lot more characters like him to show up real soon. Before that happens, we want to know your thoughts on his life, and what he could have done differently to prevent it from reaching such a stage. Like, share, and subscribe for more Invincible content. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Till then, take care, and don't pick up girls with bob cuts from the bar, because you never know how powerful they really are.